a kind, more like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different life. The kids who share the interest.
Welcome back to another episode of Hard Knock Life. I'm your host, Keith Chow, and I'm glad you guys tuned in for today's episode 40, so that's a big deal. We've reached 40 episodes of Hard Knock Life. Our special guest is a director, and you may know her films such as Green Street Hooligans, Lifted, and of course 2008's Punisher Warzone. Please welcome to Hard Knock Life our very special guest, Lexi Alexander.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. As I said, I'm really happy to have you on the show tonight. For one of the reasons, your Twitter handle is one of the best follows on the internet. We're fortunate that you follow us, and we're a great follow of yours, and you're always engaging people in great conversations on Twitter. So I'm glad to have you for a few minutes to have a one-on-one conversation tonight.
Oh, thank you. You know, it's funny. I never think anybody listens to me anymore, and then you like, sometimes I even go to meetings, or I meet somebody like you on a podcast, and they're like, you're like the best, Twitter account. I'm like, God, it just always, sometimes not always, but sometimes it feels lonely out there. It feels like everybody's muted me because I talk about the same thing,
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the things that you talk about on Twitter are really important, and part of why I wanted to have you on our show is that, I think one of the things that you talk about as a woman of color, as a director on Twitter is relevant to not only the people who watch and listen to our show, but just our interests as far as more representation for all kinds of people, both in front of and behind the camera. And I wanted to get your take on a few things before we kind of dive into your professional history, and I think for one reason people might be tuning in is to see if you have any special details about your upcoming episode of Arrow, which everyone's excited about next week. But I wanted to just kind of jump off about just this whole notion of representation, especially gender representation and racial representation. As a director, I think it's really important because there's always a push for more characters to be depicted on screen. But I think some of that change is, while it's nice to happen, in front of the camera, that structural change that needs to happen behind the camera is where you kind of come in, and you're very upfront about that. Can you talk a little bit about your path to becoming a film director and some of the barriers that you kind of bump up against in that position?
Yeah, I mean, I started out, I always tell people, who like me now and like what I stand for, that they wouldn't have liked me a few years ago. I mean, I grew up around guys, mainly around German guys, and it seems bizarre now. I did get a lot of harassment in Germany. I got the occasional thing you say about Arabs in Germany, but
right.
My team, once I was like a fighting champion, my team was always cool. You tend to be in certain small towns in Germany, you tend to be called exotic. I didn't know that there's anything wrong with exotic. Like, I used to always think, oh, it's great they call me exotic, But mainly I was around guys, either around a real hooligan firm, which were all guys, or I was around martial artists. And, to be honest, I never experienced any kind of pushback from them. They really had a certain respect for who I was. It's not like I wanted to be a guy, or it wasn't even like that I can think that I was very tomboyish in a sense. It was just, those are all the things that interested me.
Right.
And so, but what had occurred over the years, and I had not realized this, is that it like turned me into a white dude. Those were the films that I made. It's very interesting. To this day, it's very hard for me to think in any other norm. Like, when I think of a story, I first think it as an all-white male story.
Right.
And that's, now that's so mind-blowing to me, that to me, all heroes, all people who can kick ass or protect us are all white males, because that's what was in my brain. And if you look at my first films that broke me in, I did a 40-minute short film about a boxer, white male, and I did film about 150 white males, that had one woman in who, like, none of my films would pass the Bechdel test.
Right.
And I also didn't think of representation for people of color, because frankly, for the longest time, coming from Germany, that was a part of me that I was always hiding.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think for most people who are aware of your filmography know that you are from Germany, but I think some people may not have known that you are actually, you know, I referenced you as a person of color earlier when I was introducing you, but I don't think people may not be fully aware of your ethnic background, I guess.
Yeah, so my father is from Palestine. And it would actually be very obvious if you would, maybe not so much anymore, but when I was growing up in Germany, I mean, I still have class pictures of like 40 blonde and blue-eyed kids and me. And it was very obvious. You come here, it's much more of a melting pot, which is why it's so absurd that it's not represented on screen, right?
Right, right.
You know, it's funny because I was hiding it for the longest time, to the point where, and then I would also not want to be German in Hollywood.
Right, right,
so
right.
I would like literally, there were times where somebody would ask me where I'm from, and I would say Swiss and Gypsy. Like I would come up with all scenarios to avoid saying I'm German and Palestinian. And, you know, then at certain time in your life, you just have this, like, I mean, that's how it happened for me, this breakdown where I'm like, God, you know, for the last few years, I pretended to be anybody but me, to the point where, I mean, I have siblings on my father's side that are, they live in Jordan and they live in Dubai, and we speak Arabic, and they come here to visit. And, you know, to actually deny that side, you have to hide all kinds of things.
Right, right. Well, it's interesting. Like, when did you kind of come to that consciousness? You know, like as you said, if we had this conversation few years ago, we may not have even had this conversation. So at what point in your professional career, in your personal life, did you decide, when did you come to that consciousness about like that representation? Because again, you are very outspoken about it. Not only you know, the Twitter that we talked about, but there was a post that you wrote several months ago called "We Are Brienne" that kind of speaks to this whole
Right.
notion of representing as a female and representing as
Right.
a woman of color. When did you come to that consciousness? What triggering event happened that made you think maybe I should reassess?
I wasn't, I wasn't always going to the extreme. I mean, you get older, and by the time I did Punisher, I mean, we were in Montreal. People around me knew very clearly that I spoke Arabic and that side of me, but you wouldn't see me say that in an interview. You also wouldn't see me say anything about women directors have it more difficult. As a matter of fact, even during Punisher and even after, I would have told you that you're wrong, that Hollywood would make money with anybody. They would make money with an 8-headed monster, because it seemed absurd to me that a town that is really so obsessed with making money would turn anybody down,
Right.
you know? So then what happened is, I mean, I had a few producers around me. The woman who produced Green Street, she kept telling me that, she said, if you were a man, your career would be completely different. And I would argue with people like that. I would actually make them not be around me, because I thought it was such a silly thing to say. But then, you know, you have like guys male directors that come up with you. So when I was considered the hot director in town, there was four or five guys. One of them even had the same manager as me, that we were all going out for the same jobs. We were considered the new kids in town. We were all competing with each other. And their careers are now, I mean, that's why I'm not saying their names, because I don't, I mean, I don't want to call them out, but they're massive now, massive. But you compare and now if I would throw out, well, such and such and I, we're competing for the same job, now people would say, oh, how can you compare yourself with this guy? But what you have to understand is that he and I were young to hot directors going out, with me having an Oscar nomination under my belt, and him having done a film that made less money, won less awards than me. So nobody wants to go back to that point where you actually, where does the ladder stop? So it may have become aware to me, but I was still kind of in denial about it. And oddly enough, a friend asked me to write a script for her about a computer coder, a female computer coder who gets discriminated at a certain point and then transfers herself into a man to take a certain job, which she's gotten under a name. People assume she is a man because she just wants to find out what is the difference. What do they think, I can't do? And It's just as an experiment. And so as I was writing the script, it was for like a web series we wanted to do, and it was like basically 6 mini episodes of 20 minutes or something, but basically a feature script. As I was writing this, I had to research all this stuff about discrimination in tech, and things came up that were mind-blowing to me. One of the things I noticed that people are incredibly concerned, men and women, very famous men in tech and science, that the female point of view is missing. And all of a sudden it hit me, and I thought, holy mackerel, like if science, it goes on the record, famous men in science, and say it is very dangerous to have the female point of view missing, why is nobody in Hollywood, the world's biggest exporter of stories, why have you not heard one man say, we're missing the female point of view? I mean, to them, it's just like if we would never direct and if there wouldn't be a single woman, it would be totally fine to them. There's nobody concerned. It's just not, oh, we can tell all stories. We can tell stories for people of color. We don't need them. We can tell stories for women. Like they want to do all of them, and they feel very comfortable doing that.
Right.
And the big problem is that they win Oscars doing that. Many directors have won, you know, Aaron Brockovich and Norma Rae. There's all these feminist films, and they're famous for it.
And then it also, the kind of reverse of that is that women can only do stories about women. Like it would, you know, I think one of the revolutionary things about your filmography is that, you know, it's the rare instance where you were, you know, as a woman director, were given, you know, action movies and superhero movies to direct. And it's, you know, it seems almost mind-blowing now because there's such a push for that kind of diversity that, you know, you're at the kind of forefront of that where you know, you directed a movie like Punisher, and that's, you know, in 2015, it's almost like unheard of to think of a woman who can direct like the next superhero movie. I saw you were tweeting about Elizabeth Banks throwing her hat into the ring for Star Wars, and it's like,
well, I only tweeted that because it's the writer of that article says me or Ava DuVernay would be better. So just to be clear, I wasn't promoting it.
Yeah, but I think that's the other interesting thing too, is like with you and Ava DuVernay, you kind of out there in the spot. It's like, you know, no offense, of course. I mean, I love your work, but it's like it's only you two. It's like you, and whenever a movie needs a female director, they can only think of you or Ava, and it's like and I think this is a point you were making in your We Are Brienne, but there is a world of talented, you know, directors who are women who can tell any stories, right? Like,
and you know, let's be honest, okay? So, I mean, I don't hold a grudge, but we have to talk about it. The guy who just got Flash, whose name I don't know, and I really don't want to know it, to be honest. But I saw all the articles because, of course, I get CC'd on all of them, and it's a big thing when somebody with no credits, no awards, nothing, books a massive movie like that. Yeah. And by the way, I've gone up for these kind of movies, and it's amazing because like there's this kind of dark secret that nobody talks about when guys go up for Marvel films. There's a lot of like spending money in these presentations, and they tell each other how much they spend. Like I literally know of people where one dude asked the brother team, how did you get this job? And then they told him exactly, we spent this much money on a presentation. Well, none of us women can afford to spend $50,000 or $100,000 on a presentation to get a job. We just, number one, we don't know if we get the job because it's harder for us. And number two, where should we have the money? You're not throwing us these perk jobs, you know? So these guys do these things. So I don't know if he's done that or not. If he hasn't done that, if he hasn't done some miraculous 3D presentation, I'm honestly like, what did he do? Did he do a handstand? Did he what? Because I've gone up for these kind of movies. Like, you can't tell me that there wasn't a single director, male or female, any ethnicity, that did not know the Flash and wasn't as passionate, who had not more credits.
Right.
And what did he do in this room? Okay. And so let's say he really was amazingly charming. Like, why does that never work for us? Because the minute we say, well, there's many of us, somebody will say, well, they have no credit. Okay. But that never counts for them. Yeah. You know?
Well, you know, I know that you said you didn't want to name any names when you were talking, but there was an article that was recently posted in Elle.com, I think, that Ava DuVernay talked about bumping into a fellow director who she kind of came up with together. And you know, they both did independent films together. They both did, you know, they were friends in the independent. I think they even met at the Independent Spirit Awards. And she was saying, yeah, I just booked a really big movie. It's the biggest movie I've ever done. It's $20 million. It's Selma, which is, you know, she couldn't even get an Oscar nomination for that, to talk about the discrimination. And then, but the director she was talking to was like, oh yeah, I booked a big movie too. It was Jurassic World, and I got $150 million for it, right? It's like, but they had the exact same kind of like experience and credentials. Now Colin Trevorrow is like, he's got the biggest movie of all time. He's off to make the new Star Wars movies. And you know, I mean, I think that's kind of like that.
And there's so many examples of that. My God, you know, I mean, there was the guys who got Pirates of the Caribbean, you know, after just doing Kon-Tiki or whatever. I mean, there's been so many who've been. Everybody who gets a big movie at some point had never done a big movie before. This is, we shouldn't even be talking about this as some kind of like, oh, well, women don't have the experience. None of the guys had when you hired them. What are you talking about? I mean, so insane that we even, and I think that's why I'm so happy that there's now an investigation, because they're just making up their own rules. And Colin, I think we all kind of like, look, it's going to be talked about. If you're booking a big movie, $150 movie, without having done any kind of visual effects or anything, we're going to talk about it. We don't mean to attack you, but we're going to talk about that this is a big deal. While we can't get, while women who've done, you know, Catherine Hardwicke, you know, who's established an entire genre, we can't get any work, and yet here they pick you out of oblivion. It's not an attack, but then he comes back and says, well, you don't understand. All these women don't want to direct these movies. Yeah, and then I think he lost, because then we went after him. You know?
Well, I mean, I do think that that's where the double standard comes in. It's like when a man, or especially a white, if a white man does it, it's because, and this is not necessarily a knock on him, but like, it's because I earned it. But if a black person or a woman or a non-white person, it's like you have to, and it's the old adage that you have to do twice the work to get half the credit, right?
Correct.
And I think the other thing too is why there's always so much pressure on people of color and pressure on women to represent, is that because there are so few of us in the media's eye, that when we fail, we're failing for everyone. Like, basically, you know, if you're a white male, you can fail and still get another chance. But if you are a woman, if you're a person of color, and you fail, if you don't bring in the box office that you were that, you know, you're supposed to, you never get that second shot. And I think that's the other difference, because, you know, let's talk about one of the film that put you in the conversation for superhero films was Punisher Warzone, 2008. It was the third iteration of the Punisher on film, and didn't make the box office that people, I think, anticipated. Although I think in hindsight, it's probably the best received of all of the Punisher films, which I guess is kind of like a backhanded compliment too, in a way, because the first two aren't great. But it has developed a very I think large and passionate cult following in the years since 2008. I know that you've done several talks about the film. How was that experience for you? Kind of like this, because this kind of predated this current Marvel boom, right? Because Punisher didn't even belong to like the Marvel Studios Disney version that we're going to be getting soon on Daredevil. Talk about how you got that movie, and what was your experience like shooting that film?
Well, you know, I actually didn't want that film at first. You know, I didn't grow up reading The Punisher. It wasn't on my list, but the executive liked me, and they came back several times. They actually offered it to John Dahl first. Mm-hmm. So they came back to me after they couldn't make a deal. They came back to me. Looking back, the discrimination had already happened, because I was going up for the same films. Like, people clearly, all the executives and studios clearly felt something about seeing Green Street and felt that I was in the league, but I would never book these jobs. 2 years later, you know, you're a director, your agency is CAA, you know, you can't go back and work at Starbucks, but I also needed to make money at some point, you know, and so after 2 years after Green Street, it was just basically about, where am I going to get a job where I get paid? The comic book films kind of were starting to become more popular. Kevin Feige was involved and Marvel. They were just not that involved because Lionsgate was paying for it. But I did meet him and we had some good meetings. It's probably the thing I regret most about it because I actually had a really good relationship with him and his development guy at the time. And it's just that I ended up not really working with them, you know?
Mhm.
I really only had $22 million below the line. See, this is what people don't realize. You know, people say it was a $30 million film. Well, I sat on remember this clearly, and I still have the papers here. I sat on a tech scout on the bus, and they kept cutting money, which in the aftermath, I think had a lot to do with the fact that I was directing, right?
Right.
And they kept cutting money. And, you know, they actually, one of the guys over at Lionsgate was pretty cool. And he said, look, instead of us telling you what we cut, why don't you look through? And that was me with this line budget on a studio film. I didn't even know what a line budget looked like. This is not something a director normally does. But they were putting it to me as if the courtesy is that you can choose what you cut out of this budget, right? You know, I thought I had 30, at least 35 first, I thought. Then I thought I had 30 million. Then I realized that there were all these fees you had to pay for previous, like, you know, the director who directed the previous one. By the end of the time of what I saw, what I actually had to spend was 22 million. Now, it didn't scare me, but I thought we were all, you know, in one boat here, that we're making kind of a campy B-movie film. It's also what I pitched. The best I can do for $22 million.
Sure.
And somehow it felt like they were expecting me to deliver Dark Knight, or the audience was, or they promoted it wrong. They even scratched my, score that I had done with the composer. They scratched that off and hired a different composer, and he made it very much sound like The Dark Knight. And then they started changing the release date, even though I was done with the film. They changed from like September, October to December. And I was like, December, is this really a good month for this kind of film?
It's not really an Oscar film, right?
Right. And so and they were like counter programming and made sense to me. But, you know, once Patton Oswalt embraced it and turned it into a cult hit, right? When he had his festival, Deep Into the Darkness, and people stood around the block, I ended up talking a lot of these people. I remember one of them wrote an entire article about how it was mismarketed. And I realized that half of the country didn't even know this film was in the theater. So they must have just not spent the money to advertise it. And that also, I think, has a lot to do with women directors, because, you know, I see Zack Snyder doing Watchmen, and even though I heard that the studio wasn't completely behind it, they made sure everybody went. Like, they put a lot of money, and I don't think they do that with women directors.
That's a really good example too, because I don't think anyone who looks at the numbers would have thought that Watchmen was a massive hit. It's definitely not. And when you look at superhero comic book films and the kinds of money that, like, basically any Marvel film that comes out now, the big joke is that they can make a movie about any character now at this point, and it's going to make. I mean, when you make an Ant-Man movie and a Guardians of the Galaxy movie and they make $1 billion, you can pretty much make any movie.
Well, that's why they're making them nonstop. There will be 1 million of them.
Yeah, exactly. But
that's
I think
a good thing, I think, you know, because people love them, kids love them. It's not like we don't go. I certainly embrace the nerds and blurs and, you know.
Sure.
So I'm all for it. It's just that it's become like, you know, it's a weird thing where it's become, you know, like a cricket game or like a golf country club. Hi, you've been given a membership. Please come in because you look like the rest of the country club. Not like, you know, hey, you know, let's look who's talented and let's have diverse representation in front and behind the camera, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's the biggest kind of question right now. I mean, even when like Marvel, they can make movies about anyone. Their slate of characters is, you know, their Avengers are still pretty lily white when you put them up against everybody else, and there's this notion that because, you know, they're doing a Black Panther movie and they're doing a Captain Marvel movie, although like 4 or 5 years from now, who knows if we even get there, that's almost that should be enough to satiate. And that goes back to my point earlier that, like, It's this idea that like only, and actually let me get your thoughts on this. What do you think about this notion that like only women can direct women superhero movies and only women, because you proved that you can direct a male superhero movie.
Well, you probably didn't read my comments about Wonder Woman, right? Because I said there's no way I would do it. Mind you, nobody has offered me the Wonder Woman. Like,
Right.
you know, I just happen to know that I know even if they don't want to put me on the list, the one thing we and my representatives know is that when you have so few women who can do action, I'm coming up in the room, my name comes up. There's
Right.
like actually nothing you can do about it, which sometimes slightly thrills me. Because it's like you can't ignore it, you know, that, and then the whole internet is always going Lexi. So it actually makes the proof that they're ignoring me so much easier, you know.
Right.
But in this case, I said, there's no way, because I don't want to be responsible for, here goes another woman director. Let's just please have her succeed so we can have more women directors. So that's on my shoulders because,
Right.
again, it's like you said, it's not just our career, it's we do it for everybody, right?
Exactly.
We have to succeed for all women or for all people of color, because
Right.
if you fail, all women fail, and this never happens with white guys.
Right.
The other day, somebody tweeted something so funny about Pan, I think it was. Somebody tweeted, oh my God, Pan bombed. How we are going to ever make a movie with a white male lead now?
Exactly.
Because this is really concerning. But it was put so funny in
Right.
sarcasm, right? Because we never talk about that. But anyway, but then you have not only here you are the woman director, now you have the first female superhero that they've touched ever, right? There is no way I would do that, because all I would think of is I literally can fail for both women directors and for female superheroes. Like, it would be too much pressure. But I also said in the same interview, and I guess that maybe didn't make it or whatever, it made it in the next time. I said, but another woman may not think that. I'm also in this lane now where I'm an activist, right? So these things occur to me. These things are what I talk about. If you would have grabbed me right off the Queen Street, I would have not thought a thing about that this is an issue. But you need to get that woman. That's what I meant.
Right.
But of course they don't, because, you know, how would they ever, like, can you imagine that they would ever pick a woman who's done 2 TV episodes?
Right.
No way.
But that's the unfair pressure that they put on people because of, like, again, it's that lack of representation, and because there's so, like, as we've been saying all night, there's so few representatives, either like directors or characters, that's why, and it's almost like a circular logic too. And then because of that, because like there's been 2 superhero female movies like Catwoman and Elektra, they both fail, so therefore there can never be another female superhero movie. But yet Fantastic Four has failed 3 times, and they're still trying to make another one. You know what I mean?
There's a few other male ones. What, didn't Green Lantern or one of the Green ones?
Sure, yeah, Green Lantern.
And there's Supermans who fail. Like, I mean, it's not like it's Joel Schumacher's Batman. Like, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
You know, it's silly, but that's what it is. It's like, but you know, they don't want to do it from the get-go. And when you saw the Sony hack emails, you saw that very clearly. The dudes, you know, I don't want any women superheroes. They sell really bad, you know.
Right. Because the thing about Catwoman and Elektra is they weren't good movies, female lead or not. Like, they have to be good movies. And like you said, we can have mediocre movies about white male superheroes, and that's not going to, like, ruin it for white male superheroes ever again.
Right.
Speaking of white male superheroes, one of the projects that you are currently working on, or I guess you've already done it, but the world is going to see it.
They love Arrow.
You're directing episode 4 of season 4, which is called Beyond Redemption, and the internet, I know for a fact, is excited about the episode. We got our first sneak peek at some of it at the end of the most recent episode of Arrow. Can you talk a little bit about what brought you to the set in Vancouver to be part of Team Arrow?
Well, it was you know, this is how it always goes. TV is also a very kind of closed industry. And it's very interesting because there you have actually, as a director, not that much responsibility. You still have to direct, but the show doesn't live or die on the director. The major creative decision are made by the showrunners and the writers. You know, whereas on a movie, I write a director's draft with the writer. I can be on set and last minute change something. You know, it's all up to me. Or, you know, any kind of look wise, I establish the look. Whereas in TV, that's just not what you do. You're there for the actors, and you're there to put, you know, a little bit, some like, you know, what is it they want and how I can give them the best product back. I always thought I would enjoy this because I also like writing, and it's nice to not be stuck for 2 years on a project, on a movie, developing it and post and this and that, and not have time to write. So it's nice to make actually a living and also be able to write your own project. And if you make a fairly good living in TV, you can go off during summer and do a movie that you make no money on, right? And that's what a lot of people do, but they won't let us do it. Again, it becomes one of those perk thing where you have to know somebody, and it's really about somebody tapping you. Now, I think there has been some pressure lately that these numbers can't go on. In this particular case, it was a producer, an executive producer, a writer, showrunner named Andrew Kreisberg, who like tracked me down. He wasn't my people, you know, pitching me to him. He called, you know, my people and had me come in and meet with all the showrunners and said, look, I really like Punisher Warzone, and you know, I like Green Street, and there was also this other thing I did for Anthony Seiker, the creator of CSI. So it did show that I can, I mean, already my short film showed it, but they always want to see that you can also work on a small budget and stuff. So they said, would you be interested in this? And I said, yes. And so then they hired me. But that's what it took all these years. I mean, I cannot tell you, people in the general public have no idea. Like they literally have no idea. They think that I don't want to do certain things. Now, the real world things that they would be excited to have somebody like me, that it would be for them an upgrade to have somebody like me, but they don't care. This is not about what you can bring to the show and what your skills are, or, oh my God, we could have an Oscar-nominated, you know, director on it. This is not about them. They're just bothered that you're even asking, you know.
But at the same token, do you feel? I mean, it feels like, at least in recent years, at least, that, and specifically for genre television, like superhero and fantasy television, like there seems to be, and maybe it's an illusion, but there seems to be more opportunities for women directors in that field, at least more so than
really.
in the past.
My numbers are very low.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get that's what I mean. It may just be kind of like a distorted view, just because directors like Michelle MacLaren and Patty Jenkins, like who directed things on The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, like those kinds of shows. Although I know that Game of Thrones had no women directors last season, which was a big deal.
For 2 seasons now. They didn't hire this season either.
Right, so that's also a big deal. But like, I mean, I guess that goes back to what I was saying.
You are talking about one. Yeah, we have 24 women that work all the time. And this is actually very dangerous because what's happened is it's called tokenism. And it's actually a very specific strategy for the status quo to make it look like, you know, look, we there's this group. But then these numbers come out, and we're shocked that Supernatural hasn't had a woman in 10 years, and American Horror Story hasn't had a woman, and Agent Carter hasn't had a woman director. Like, there's all these shows, and we're shocked, but we're saying it every year.
Yeah,
but
that's a good point.
These 24 women, and I don't blame them for it, they are very quiet about this. Oftentimes, they actually stand in the way of equality. And I'm saying that while it does get me mad sometimes that they often vote against us or actually play the game of making it look like it isn't that bad. You know, before the ACLU thing, there was this whole thing where they actually spoke against us in the press, you know. But they're doing it because they know that there's one woman per show, maybe two.
And they want to be that woman.
And they have been tapped, and they're in that group. And, you know, nobody wants to go back to not making money. I understand that many of these women have kids, they're single mothers, they've had years of not working. Once you've tapped and been let in a country club, you do everything to not get the people that run the country club upset. And that's how it's been going. And it's very upsetting. But anyway, so Arrow. So Andrew Kreisberg brought me in, and that was it. It took really somebody, and I've said it to him 10 times, and I've sent him a card. I literally like practiced handwriting to like, so I made sure, and then I ended up thinking I wasn't even able to do it. So I bought like a special program so it looked like handwriting. This is how fun it was. I like made a real effort to make sure I thank him, not only for me, but for, you know, everybody else, because this is a big deal. And yeah, and so it was a lot of fun, lot of fun working with the creatives. Yeah, and I think I'm going to do a lot more TV from now on.
Well, I think we as fans of your work are very excited to hear that, and as fans of shows as fans of the show Arrow, I think we're really excited, because it looks like from the teaser that we saw after the last episode, the one that you directed is a fairly important one in terms of like some of the story fallout, and it goes along with what you're saying. As a TV director, it's your job to kind of move the story along, because there are things that happen before and after that you have to make sure happen. But a couple of the big things that happen in your episode is it's the debut of Rutina Weasley, which is, I think, very anticipated.
Oh my God,
by
and
people.
she's so amazing. She's so amazing.
And which is one great thing is that she's actually playing an established DC Comics character. The lady
oh my
cop.
God, I hope she gets her own show.
Is she that good?
She is so amazing. She's really a good actress, but she's just like so. It's just one of those dream actors that does like everything that you direct them. They're like, okay, and then she does it perfectly. You know, no complaints, no nothing. She's just super cool.
And you're also, one of the things I think your episodes looks like it's going to be doing is it's setting up the future DC Comics TV show that's coming on the CW Legends of Tomorrow, because your show is all about the aftermath of the resurrection of Sarah Lance. And can you talk a little bit about just kind of that process working with these characters that, like you said, are already established, and it's your job to kind of set them up for the next thing?
Right.
What was that process like?
Well, I looked at the script. You know, it's interesting because people assume that I probably, you know, got a very action-heavy script. I think there was a lot more hype about me directing than anybody expected. You know, and that just comes from being in the comic book world, you know,
Sure.
so everybody expected that they would have a special episode that's action heavy and this and that. That's not what happens. That's really not how a show can function. It's like you get scheduled where you get scheduled. And it so turned out, actually, for timing reasons, I was supposed to do number 5, but then did number 4, that I got one that was very drama heavy. Now, I thought, oh, people may be upset about this because, of course, they want all the martial arts and all the this and that. But, you know, it's actually interesting because people don't realize that I went to a very difficult drama school for a very long time. Precisely, it was a Meissner and Stanislavski technique, you know, drama school with actors. And I didn't go there to act. I went there to become a director so I could talk to actors. And because I got just so thrown into the action after the short film, I mean, the short film, people saw that I can, this is drama and this is real, you know, acting and this and that. But then like all they saw was fights. In Green Street, all they saw was fights. And so I got thrown in, and people forget that action is not the only thing I do. Like, I'm actually really good. My plan was to become an actor's director. I never wanted to have explosions and car chases and this and that, you know. And so it was actually incredibly neat for me to be able to just work on very quiet scenes between actors. And I was worried that I couldn't add a lot to, you know, that fans would be upset, or that the producers would be upset that I wouldn't be able to add enough, you know. And I mean, so from what they've told me, it's like one of their favorite episodes.
I mean, just from the preview scenes that they aired, there's a scene between Paul Blackthorne and Katie Lotz that just from like the 5 seconds in the teaser, it's like, I feel like it's probably going to be one of the best scenes of the season. I think, you know, as a fan of the show, as I said, that whole universe, I hope that you were able to come back and play in the sandbox in Star City, and maybe even Central City. Who knows? You could do. You talked about the Flash earlier. Maybe you can.
I'm like literally putting my name in the hat for, you know, I was really trying hard to get Luke Cage. Didn't get it this time, but maybe next time. But I literally put my hat into every my name into every hat of every one of these shows. Made it very clear. I just signed with some new TV agents, and I made it very clear, like, look, this is what I do. And I'm so excited about it because I have all these followers who are excited about it. And I even know the ones that mute me for the political stuff, but then come back when I do
the nerd stuff.
And that's fine with me too, but I'm so excited because they're excited. And there's a genuine thing that people really like, the people who dig, Patton being the loudest and most famous one, but there's a genuine, like, where the issue is not about me. It's not about me being a woman. It's not about me being nice or not nice, or political or not political. Like Patton, for example, we're friends now, but that's not the point. Like, he's genuinely excited for me to dive into superhero TV. And there's many like unfamous Pattons in the fan world who feel just like that. And the end result of all this talk that I do on Twitter is for people to feel like that about somebody with talent. This, never mind what their skin color is, never mind what their gender is or what their sexuality is. It's about, like, can this person, like, do the thing that we like to do? And if they do, then we support them. And to me, that's actually a really big part of this. That's why I'm actively fighting for all of these superhero shows.
Well, one of those followers that you have on Twitter is actually a writer for the Nerds of Color. His name is Eric, and he's a big fan of your work. He's a soccer nut and a martial artist, so he's like right in your wheelhouse. And he's talked about wanting you to work with Michael J. White.
Where is he? He wrote the Michael J. White thing.
That's right. He wants you to resurrect Michael J. White's career, and
that's why I didn't realize that you guys have this podcast together.
Yeah, we're all one empire. But I'm glad you brought up Luke Cage, because I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, and I know we're kind of like going along on this, but I wrote a thing on the Nerds of Color a little over a year ago now about why I think that the Iron Fist show should star an Asian American lead instead of a white male lead, and that's gotten some play on the internet a little bit. And one of the things that I think is interesting about Iron Fist is that it's the one Marvel Netflix show that hasn't had any development around it. Then there was even a report a few months back about how there's a possibility they might scrap it all together because they can't find a director or a writer with a vision. And I think Eric threw your name in the ring for as most people do with superheroes, but I think because it's a martial arts superhero.
I could like literally go in and pitch this entire thing and do it. But see, for that, they would have to let me, this is the thing. And, by the way, I mean, it's interesting because it's all about where your stock is, because it's not, I pitch TV shows right now. It's not unusual for me to pitch a TV show. And there was a certain time where it would have been very normal for me to be one of the people they would consider bringing in, saying, do you have a vision for, for Iron Fist? I mean, you see, I think Melissa Rosenberg, I believe, is Jessica Jones, right?
Mm-hmm.
The showrunner on Jessica. She's written Twilight and Dexter, which are not necessarily like you see Jessica Jones in it.
Right.
But we all think that she must have done an incredible job because it looks amazing, right? It looks like she hit it right. So it's not unusual to bring a few people in and ask, but at this point, I mean, I could try and see if I can get a meeting. I think I'm not sure they're even interested, which is such a bummer because, this could be, I mean, I would turn this into the most popular show ever. I'm telling you, if I would make that show and cast it, and it's Iron Fist, it's martial arts, it'd be unbelievable,
Yeah, and I think you had tweeted that like we need more Asian American male leads and
well, this hit me the other day, and see, I'm not one way or another. Like I will not. I speak out for all underrepresented groups, because somebody said, "Well, Asian women too." I'm like, well, I actually at the moment I said yes, we always need more Asian women actors. But I said, think about this: we don't have for the Asian population in this country, we don't have an Asian Will Smith. We don't have an Asian Denzel Washington. you know, we once in a while get a Chad Lee and an Andy Lau, but then they have to be like martial artists. Like why don't we have an Asian Matt Damon?
Yeah.
You know, who could have been the kid from Slumdog Millionaire?
Dev Patel.
Yeah, he could have been, but see, where is he now? Why
Right.
don't we give him the roles that Matt is up? Why can't we make him born? I was fighting back in the day for this guy named Edgar Ramirez to get born, who, from what I heard from his agent, because we met Edgar, very nice man, and very great actor too. You know who he is, right?
Yeah, of course.
He was in one of the books. And they actually talked about him potentially getting the franchise, and they didn't give it to him. And you can't tell me we all know what that was about, right? And so it's one of those things where I'm gonna push them to get over this, because they're out there. I've seen all those Asian actors, and it's almost silly that some of them told me they start martial arts only because it's expected from them. They don't want to do martial arts.
Right.
You know.
Well, I mean, we could talk all
hours.
evening
I know.
about these,
could do
and we
this
do on
every
Twitter
week.
sometimes. We do on Twitter sometimes.
Yes.
So
Well, now that I know you, and then I get it now that okay, you two are partners. I was confused. Okay.
yeah, the Nerds of Color is we try to cover all bases.
I should become your regular guest host, because everybody wants me to do this, and I am too like insane to set this up. I've promised them that I would do a regular podcast for a year now.
Well, let's do it. I am more than willing and happy to have you be a regular part of a Hard Knock Life. I think that would be great, and I think our listeners and viewers would probably agree.
Yay! Well, all them writing in right now. No, we hate her.
the people who hate
Fuck
you
that
hate us
bitch.
already, so it's okay.
I know,
It's
right?
okay.
We are our own group, and that's really neat. We're actually trying to do something, a few friends of mine, because Black Twitter is very powerful, and I think that we can learn from their power. And I think we should become a more outspoken group for inclusivity that also includes Asians, includes Latinos, women. And I think that if we become that voice for inclusion on Twitter, we could really do a lot of great things.
I'm going to let that be the last word for tonight. Her episode of Arrow this Wednesday, October 28th on
Correct.
the CW at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And just once again, thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you, and we'll see each other on Twitter.
That's right. Thanks. I'll see you next time.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV, yo. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share the interest together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NO.